The sun of Ethelgard did not shine, it burned. It was a hateful, white-hot eye that stared down upon the dunes of the shattered expanse, turning the sand into a shimmering mirage of heat and death. For 3 days, the sky had been choked with the smoke of burning ships, the debris of 100 different civilizations raining down like metallic hail. The Galactic Concordat, the supposed alliance of peace and order among the stars, had made its decision clear before fleeing into the safety of hyperspace. They had labeled the Velari Queen, Nyxera, a threat to universal stability, a biological anomaly too dangerous to be allowed to exist. They had turned their backs, sealed their gates, and left her to die in the dust. But humanity, the newcomers, the scrappy, stubborn, and often illogical species from the third rock of a minor star system, had not left. They had dug in. Commander Yerick Thorne wiped a mixture of sweat and grit from his eyes, his visor cracked from a near-miss plasma bolt hours earlier. He looked out over the ridge of the command bunker, a hastily constructed fortification of sandbags and scavenged hull plating. Below them, in the valley floor, the Velari Royal Guard stood in a tight formation. They were beautiful and terrifying creatures, tall and slender, with skin the color of a deep, twilight ocean and hair like spun moonlight, stark white against the blue. At their center stood Nyxera. She was not wearing armor, for her people believed that true royalty needed no protection other than the loyalty of their subjects. Her white hair flowed in the hot wind, and her blue skin seemed to glow with a faint, internal bioluminescence, a sign of her immense psychic power. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped, but her head remained high. Yerick respected that. He respected anyone who could stand tall when the universe wanted them on their knees. "Commander," said Lieutenant Mara Vance, her voice crackling through the comms unit. She was crouched beside him, checking the charge on her rifle. Mara was small, fierce, and possessed a dry wit that kept the squad sane during the longest nights. "Scanners are picking up movement on the northern ridge. The Krell mercenaries. They're coming back for another pass." Yerick nodded, grimacing. The Krell were bounty hunters, insectoid creatures with chitinous armor and no sense of honor. They had been hired by the Concordat to finish the job they were too cowardly to do themselves. How many? 2 platoons. Maybe more. They are bringing heavy walkers. Yerick sighed, the sound lost in the howling wind. Of course they are. Because why send a knife when you can send a bulldozer? He turned to look at his team. There was Sergeant Silas Brick O'Malley, a man so large he barely fit inside the standard-issue combat suit, who was currently trying to share his last ration bar with a stray desert lizard he had named General. There was tech specialist Renzo Lee, a young genius who could hack a door lock with a paperclip and a prayer, who was currently sweating profusely as he tried to jury-rig the bunker's shield generator. And there was Corporal Alara Finch, the medic, who was calmly stitching up a wound on her own arm while humming a tune from her homeworld. They were not heroes. They were tired, dirty, and scared. But they were hay. "Why are we doing this, Yerick?" Renzo asked, not looking up from his wires. His fingers moved with frantic precision. "The Concordat says she's a weapon, a planet killer. If we let them take her, maybe the war ends. Maybe we get to go home." Yerick looked at Nyxera again. She was speaking to her guards, her voice soft but carrying across the distance. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the way her guards straightened, the way their fear vanished, replaced by devotion. "Because they are wrong, Renzo. She's not a weapon. She's a mother, and she's a leader. And because when everyone else ran, she stayed to protect her people from the fallout of their own politics. That counts for something." Mara snorted. "Also, because if we let the bug people take her, they'll probably eat us next. I'm not keen on being appetizers." Silas chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "General agrees. He says bugs taste like chicken, but he'd prefer not to find out firsthand." The lizard blinked slowly, seemingly unimpressed by the conversation. The ground shook. A low hum vibrated through the soles of Yerick's boots, growing louder until it became a roar. Over the northern ridge, the silhouettes of Krell walkers appeared, their multi-legged bodies clanking against the rock. Behind them, waves of infantry poured forward, their weapons charging with ominous green light. "Shields up!" Yerick shouted. Renzo slammed his hand onto the console. A flickering blue barrier erupted around the bunker, just as the first volley of plasma fire slammed into it. The air sizzled, smelling of ozone and burnt sand. The shield held, but barely. Sparks rained down from the ceiling of the bunker. "Hold the line," Yerick ordered, raising his rifle. "Wait for my mark. Let them get close. We don't have the ammo for a long-range fight." The battle that followed was a chaos of noise and light. When the shield finally collapsed under the sustained assault, Yerick gave the order to fire. Human weapons, crude but reliable kinetic projectiles, tore into the advancing Krell lines. The insectoids screeched, their chitin cracking under the impact of solid slugs. Silas roared, wielding a heavy machine gun with one hand, mowing down a dozen enemies before they could reach the trench. Mara picked off targets with surgical precision, her shots finding the weak points in the Krell armor. Elara moved between the wounded, dragging them to cover, her hands stained with blood and sand. But there were too many of them. The Krell walkers stepped over the bodies of their fallen comrades, their cannon arms swiveling toward the human position. A beam of concentrated energy sliced through the air, vaporizing the sandbag wall to Yerek's left. He was thrown backward, hitting the dirt hard. His ears rang. He tasted copper. "Commander!" Elara screamed, crawling toward him. "I'm fine," Yerek gasped, pushing himself up. His ribs felt broken. "Status. Shield is gone. Ammo is at 30%. Renzo yelled, his face pale. "We can't hold them." Yerek looked over the edge of the trench. The Krell were closing in. Behind them, he saw Nixera. She had not moved. She stood amidst the dying guards, her hands raised. A sphere of pure white energy began to form around her, pulsing with rhythm. She was preparing a final act, a suicide blast that would take the Krell with her. She was choosing to die rather than be captured, and taking as many enemies as possible with her. It was noble. It was tragic. It was exactly what the Concordat feared. "No," Yerek whispered. "Not like this." He grabbed his radio. "Nixera, can you hear me?" There was a pause. Then, a voice echoed in his mind. Not through the radio, but directly into his thoughts. It was cool, like water, and sad. "I hear you, human. You should flee. Your sacrifice is unnecessary." "It's not a sacrifice if we choose it," Yerek thought back, focusing his will. "Don't do it. Hold your fire. We're coming to you. You cannot defeat them." "Maybe not," Yerek said aloud, standing up. "But we can distract them. Mara, Silas, flanking maneuver Alpha. Renzo, keep the comms open. Elara, stay with the wounded." "What are you doing?" Mara shouted, firing 2 more shots before ducking. "Doing something stupid," Yerek grinned, though it hurt his face. "Cover me." He vaulted over the trench wall, running not away from the enemy, but toward the center of the battlefield, toward Nixera. Bullets kicked up sand around his feet. Plasma bolts singed his uniform. He didn't stop. He ran with every ounce of strength left in his battered body. Behind him, he heard Silas roaring a challenge, drawing the fire of the walkers. Mara was laying down suppressive fire, her rifle barking rhythmically. They were buying him time. Seconds, maybe minutes. Yerek slid into the crater where Nixera stood. Her guards formed a circle around her, their weapons drawn, but they lowered them as they recognized the human insignia. Nixera looked at him, her large, dark eyes wide with confusion. Her white hair was matted with dust, and a cut on her cheek leaked silver blood. "You are foolish," she said, her voice audible now, melodic and strange. "And you're welcome," Yerek panted, leaning against a rock. "Now, turn off the doomball. We have a plan." "There's no plan. You are 7 humans. They are 500. 7 humans and 1 very brave lizard," Yerek corrected. "And we have something they don't." "What?" "Surprise. And really bad attitudes." Before Nixera could respond, the ground exploded. A Krell walker had found their position. Its cannon arms swung down, aiming directly at them. Yerek closed his eyes, waiting for the end. But it never came. Instead, there was a deafening crash, followed by the sound of tearing metal. Yerek opened his eyes. Standing between them and the walker was a massive shape. It was not human. It was a Velari warrior, twice the height of a man, with muscles like steel cables. He had caught the walker's leg with his bare hands, straining against the mechanical weight. His blue skin was bruised, his white hair wild. He looked at Yerek and grinned, revealing sharp teeth. "Go," the warrior shouted. "We hold them." More Velari warriors emerged from the dust, joining the fray. They fought with spears of light and sheer physical prowess, tackling the Krell infantry. It was a melee, brutal and intimate. Yerek realized that Nixera's presence had ignited a fury in her people that the Concordat had underestimated. They were not just defending a queen. They were defending their right to exist. Yerek grabbed Nixera's arm. "We need to move. Now." She resisted for a moment, watching her people die. "I cannot leave them." "If you die, they die for nothing," Yerek said firmly. "If you live, you can save them later. Trust me. I'm human. We're good at surviving against the odds." Something in his tone convinced her. She nodded. Together, they ran. Not toward the human bunker, which was now overrun, but toward the canyon walls to the east. Yerek knew the terrain. He had studied the maps. There was an old mining tunnel there, narrow and unstable, but impossible for the large Krell walkers. It was their only chance today as they ran. The battle raged behind them. Yerrick could hear Silas's laughter, manic and wild, as he engaged a group of Krell with his empty rifle as a club. He could hear Mara shouting coordinates for an A-strike that wasn't coming. He pushed the grief down. He had to focus. They reached the entrance to the mine just as a plasma bolt scorched the rock above Yerrick's head. Nixra stumbled, her strength failing. Yerrick caught her, hauling her into the darkness of the tunnel. The air inside was cool and stale, smelling of ancient dust. "Renzo!" Yerrick called into his comms. "Renzo, if you can hear me, we're in the mine. Sector 4. Static." Then, a weak voice. "Copy, Commander. We're retreating. Silas is holding the ray. He's not coming out." Yerrick. Yerrick closed his eyes. "Silas. The big guy. The one who shared his food with a lizard." "Understood," Yerrick said, his voice thick. "Get the others out. Meet us at the extraction point." "Elora is hit. Bad. I'm carrying her. Mara is. She's covering us. Hurry, Yerrick." The line went dead. Yerrick slumped against the wall of the tunnel. Nixra sat beside him, her breathing shallow. In the dim light, her blue skin looked almost gray. She reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cold. "Your friend," she said softly. "He died for me." "He died for what he believed in," Yerrick corrected. "There's a difference." "Why?" Nixra asked. "Why do you fight for us? The Concordat offered you peace. They offered you technology. They offered you acceptance into the galactic community. All you had to do was step aside." Yerrick looked at her. He thought about Earth. He thought about the history of humanity, a species that had spent thousands of years fighting itself, only to come together when faced with the unknown. He thought about the injustice of it all, the powerful abandoning the weak, the logical choice being the cruel one. "Because we've been there," Yerrick said. "We've been the ones everyone turned away from. We've been the refugees, the outcasts, the mistakes. We know what it feels like to be alone in the dark. And we decided, a long time ago, that we wouldn't let anyone else feel that way if we could help it. It's not logic, Nixra. It's empathy. It's the one thing the Concordat lost when they started caring more about order than life." Nixra stared at him. For the first time, the regal mask slipped, and he saw the vulnerability beneath. She was terrified, not of death, but of failure, of letting her people down. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered. "My powers, they are draining. The stress of the bond with my people, it is too much." Yerrick frowned. "What bond?" "The Vilari are connected. Psychically. When they suffer, I feel it. When they die, a part of me dies. That is why the Concordat fears me. They think I can control them. But I don't control them. I share them. And right now, I'm drowning in their pain." Yerrick realized then why she had been so still on the battlefield. She hadn't been commanding. She had been enduring. She was feeling every wound, every fear, every last breath of her soldiers. It was a burden no single being should have to bear. "Can you break the connection?" Yerrick asked. "No, it is who we are." "Then let us share it," Yerrick said. Nixra looked at him as if he were insane. "You are human. Your minds are not compatible. It would kill you." "Maybe," Yerrick shrugged. "Or maybe we're just stubborn enough to handle it." "Renzo, are you there?" A faint crackle. "Barely. Commander, we're at the exit. But the Krell are blocking the path. We're pinned down. Keep them busy. I have an idea." "Nixra, take my hand." She hesitated, then placed her slender, blue hand in his. Her skin was icy. Yerrick closed his eyes and focused. He didn't try to push her away or dominate her mind. He simply opened his own. He thought of Silas's laugh. He thought of Mara's sarcasm. He thought of Renzo's brilliance and Elora's kindness. He thought of the heat of the sun, the taste of dust, the fear, and the hope. He projected it all toward her, a stream of human consciousness, raw and unfiltered. At first, there was resistance. Then, a surge of shock. Nixra gasped, her body arching. But then, the flow stabilized. Yerrick felt her pain. Yes, it was overwhelming, a tidal wave of sorrow. But he also felt her strength. And she felt his. She felt the stubborn, irrational, defiant hope of humanity. She felt the memory of a billion humans who had refused to give up, who had fought against impossible odds, who had loved despite the cost. The connection widened. Through Nixra, Yerrick could feel the remaining Vilari warriors. And through the Vilari, he could feel the humans. It was a web of consciousness, fragile but bright. In that moment, they were not separate species. They were one entity, united by the choice to stand firm. Nixra's eyes snapped open. They were no longer dark. but glowing with a brilliant white light. The air in the tunnel began to vibrate. The dust on the floor rose, suspended in the air. "I feel them," she whispered, her voice echoing with power. "I feel all of them." "Good," Yerrick said, gritting his teeth against the headache splitting his skull. "Now, let's show those bugs what happens when you mess with our friends." Nyxera stood up. She pulled Yerrick up with her. She walked to the entrance of the tunnel, where the light of the desert blazed. Yerrick followed, his hands still in hers. Outside, the Krell had surrounded Renzo, Mara, and Alara. The humans were backed against a cliff, their weapons empty. The Krell commander, a towering insect with jagged mandibles, raised its weapon to execute them. Nyxera stepped out into the sunlight. She did not raise a weapon. She raised her voice. It was not a shout, but a song. A harmonic resonance that vibrated through the bones of every living creature in the valley. The Krell froze. Their exoskeletons began to crack. The sound was not destructive in a physical sense, but in a psychic one. It disrupted their hive-mind coordination, their ability to process command. They fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Disoriented and confused, the Vilari warriors, sensing their queen's resurgence, rallied. They surged forward, not with violence, but with a wave of psychic pressure that pushed the Krell back. The humans, freed from the immediate threat, scrambled to join them. Mara helped Alara up. Renzo dropped his datapad and picked up a rock, throwing it at a stunned Krell with surprising accuracy. Yerrick watched, amazed. Nyxera was not killing them. She was disabling them. She was breaking their will to fight without shedding blood. It was a display of power far greater than any weapon the Concordat possessed. It was mercy.as. The Krell retreated, dragging their confused comrades with them. The silence that followed was profound. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The dead lay still. The survivors stood amidst the ruin. Breathing heavily, Nyxera lowered her hands. The glow faded from her eyes. She swayed, and Yerrick caught her before she fell. She was lighter now, but the weight in her eyes remained. "You saved them," Yerrick said. "We saved each other," she corrected. She looked at the humans, then at her Vilari. "The Concordat will return. They will send more. They will not stop until I am dead or captured." Yerrick looked at Mara, who was bandaging Alara's arm. He looked at Renzo, who was trying to salvage a Krell weapon. He looked at the empty space where Silas had stood. "Let them come," Yerrick said. "We'll be ready." Nyxera smiled, a small, genuine smile. "You are a strange species," Yerrick thought. "Illogical, reckless, emotional." "Yeah," Yerrick grinned, wincing as his ribs protested. "But we're loyal, and we make pretty good allies." The story of the Battle of the Shattered Expanse would spread across the galaxy. It would be told in the halls of the Concordat as a warning, and in the hidden corners of the oppressed worlds as a beacon of hope. It was not the end of the war. The Concordat was vast, and its resources were endless. Humanity had made an enemy of the most powerful alliance in the known universe. They had no ships, no funding, and no official support. They had only each other, and the Vilari. But as Yerrick looked at the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear, he felt a sense of peace. They had chosen the hard path, the right path, and for the first time in a long time, humanity was not just surviving. They were leading, not with armies or fleets, but with a simple, radical idea, that no one should be left behind. Nyxera squeezed his hand. "Where do we go now?" Yerrick looked at his team. They were battered, broken, but alive. They looked back at him, waiting for orders, waiting for direction. "Now," Yerrick said, "we dig in. We build, we prepare, and we wait for them to make the next mistake. Because they will. Arrogance always makes mistakes." Mara limped over, leaning on her rifle. "So, what's the plan, boss? Do we have a base? A ship? Anything?" Yerrick laughed, a dry, raspy sound. "Nope. We have a hole in the ground, a few broken rifles, and a queen who can sing bugs to sleep. I'd say we're ahead of the game." Renzo joined them, holding up a salvage Krell communication device. "I managed to decrypt their logs. They are calling for reinforcements. But they're also reporting a psychic anomaly. They are scared, Yerrick. They are actually scared." "Good," Alara said, her voice weak but steady. "Fear makes people careful. Careful people make mistakes." Silas's lizard, General, crawled out from under a rock and climbed onto Yerrick's boot. It looked at the group, then let out a tiny squeak. "See," Yerrick said, picking up the lizard and placing it on his shoulder. "Even General agrees. We're in this together." The night fell over Ethelgard, cold and dark. But in the valley, fires were lit. Humans and Vilari sat together, sharing rations, tending wounds, and speaking in broken translations and gestures. They were two species, vastly different, bound by blood and choice. The Concordat had turned away, thinking that isolation was strength. But humanity had shown them that true strength lay in connection, in the refusal to abandon the vulnerable, in the courage to stand alone, so that no one else had to. Yerrick watched Nyxra talking to her remaining gods. She was teaching them a human word. Family. It was a concept foreign to the rigid hierarchy of the Vilari, but one they were beginning to understand. As the firelight danced in her white hair, Yerrick knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and the darkness was deep, but they had lit a spark, and sparks, if fed properly, could start fires that burned down empires. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the camp. The hum of repaired machinery, the soft murmur of voices, the wind in the dunes. It was not peace. Not yet, but it was hope. And for now, that was enough. The years that followed the Battle of the Shattered Expanse were not defined by the silence of peace, but by the noisy, chaotic, and beautiful work of reconstruction. The Concordat did not return with fleets of warships, as Yerrick had feared. Instead, they returned with diplomats, lawyers, and observers, sent to investigate the psychic anomaly that had disabled an entire mercenary battalion without firing a single lethal shot. They expected to find a monster, a weapon of mass destruction that needed to be contained. What they found was a community. In the valley where the sand had once been stained with blood, green shoots of Ethelgardian flora were beginning to push through the soil, nurtured by Vilari bioengineering and human irrigation systems. The bunker had been expanded into a sprawling settlement, a hybrid of human modular housing and Vilari crystalline architecture, shimmering in the twilight like a jewel embedded in the desert. Yerrick Thorne stood on the balcony of the new command center, which was less a military outpost and more a town hall. His hair was graying at the temples, and the scar on his cheek from the battle had faded to a thin white line. But his posture remained rigid, alert. He watched the scene below with a sense of wonder that never quite left him. Humans and Vilari worked side by side. Renzo Lee, now the head of the Joint Technological Institute, was arguing passionately with a Vilari engineer about the efficiency of solar panels versus kinetic energy harvesters. The argument was heated, filled with waving hands and expressive gestures, but it ended, as it always did, with laughter and a shared meal. Mara Vance, promoted to Chief of Security, was training a mixed squad of human recruits and Vilari warriors. She was shouting instructions, her voice carrying across the square, while Alara Finch, now the Director of Medical Services, supervised a clinic where human medicine and Vilari healing arts were combined to treat ailments neither species could cure alone. Nyxra approached Yerrick silently, her presence announced only by the subtle shift in the air pressure, a lingering effect of her psychic resonance. She wore simple robes of woven silk, no longer the regal armor of a queen under siege, but the attire of a leader who had chosen to live among her people rather than above them. Her blue skin seemed brighter in the sunlight, and her white hair was tied back in a practical braid, though strands still escaped to frame her face. She leaned against the railing beside him, her shoulder touching his. "The Concordat delegation is leaving tomorrow," she said, her voice soft. "Ambassador Kalen says they are cautiously optimistic about our integration proposal." Yerrick snorted. "Cautiously optimistic. That's diplomat speak, for we have no idea what you are doing, but you're too expensive to fight and too interesting to ignore." Nyxra smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of her eyes. "They fear us, Yerrick, not because we are dangerous, but because we are happy. The Concordat is built on order, on hierarchy, on the suppression of emotion for the sake of efficiency. We are messy. We are loud. We feel everything. And we are thriving. That is a revolution they cannot stop with weapons." Yerrick turned to look at her. The bond between them, the psychic connection they had forged in the tunnel, had not broken. It had evolved. It was no longer a desperate lifeline in battle, but a quiet hum in the background of their lives. He could feel her contentment, her love for the people they had saved, and her deep, abiding affection for him. It was a strange sensation for a man who had spent most of his life relying on logic and tactics, but he had learned to embrace it. He had learned that strength was not just about holding the line. It was about letting someone in. "Do you regret it?" Yerrick asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "Leaving the palace. Giving up the traditional power structure." Nyxra shook her head. "Power is isolation, Yerrick. I was alone in that palace, surrounded by guards who feared me and advisors who used me. Here, I'm surrounded by friends who challenge me, who laugh with me, who cry with me. I have never been more powerful than I am now, because I have never been more connected." She reached out and took his hand. "And I have you. You taught me that love is not a weakness. It is the strongest force in the universe." Yerrick squeezed her hand. "I still think Silas would have made a terrible wedding planner, though." He would have tried to serve ration bars as cake. Nixra laughed, a sound like wind chimes. General the Lizard would have objected. He has high standards. 6 months later, the wedding took place in the center of the valley, under the canopy of the first fully grown Ethelgardian ironbark trees. It was not a traditional human wedding, nor a traditional Vilari ceremony. It was something entirely new. The guests included humans from Earth, Vilari from the royal court, and even a few defectors from the Concordat who had been inspired by the story of the Shattered Expanse. The air was filled with the scent of blooming desert flowers and the sound of music, a blend of human guitars and Vilari harmonic singers. Yerrick stood at the altar, wearing a suit that Renzo had insisted on tailoring, though it was slightly too tight around the shoulders. He looked out at the crowd. Mara was there, wiping a tear from her eye while pretending to check her weapon. Renzo was recording the event on 3 different devices, muttering about lighting angles. Ilara was smiling, her arm healed, standing next to a Vilari healer who had become her partner. And in the front row, sitting on a specially constructed perch, was General the Lizard, wearing a tiny bow tie. When Nixra walked down the aisle, the crowd fell silent. She did not walk alone. She was accompanied by the remaining members of her original guard, those who had survived the battle, and by Yerrick's old squad. They represented the 2 worlds coming together. As she reached Yerrick, the psychic bond between them flared, not with pain, but with a wave of pure joy that washed over every person in the attendance. For a moment, everyone felt what they felt: the profound relief of survival, the excitement of the future, and the deep, anchoring certainty of love. The officiant, an elderly human priest and a Vilari elder speaking in unison, recited the vows. They promised not just to love each other, but to protect the bridge they had built between their species. They promised to listen, to learn, and to stand together against any darkness that might try to divide them. When they exchanged rings, simple bands of metal and crystal fused together. The sky above seemed to brighten, as if the sun itself was approving. The reception lasted for 3 days. There was dancing, feasting, and storytelling. Yerrick found himself sitting by the fire late on the second night, watching the stars. Nixra sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. "We did," Yerrick agreed. "Though I think Renzo is trying to invent a machine that turns sand into wine. I'm not sure if that's genius or madness." "Probably both," Nixra said. "Like us." Yerrick chuckled. He looked at the settlement, lights twinkling in the darkness. Children, both human and Vilari, were running through the streets, playing games that combined tag with telekinetic tricks. They did not see differences in skin color or biology. They saw only friends. This was the legacy they had created, not just a peace treaty, but a family years turned into decades. The story of the Human-Vilari alliance became a legend, taught in schools across multiple star systems. The Concordat, slowly and reluctantly, began to change. The example set by Ethelgard proved that diversity was not a threat to stability, but a source of resilience. Other oppressed species began to reach out, seeking alliances based on mutual respect rather than subjugation. Humanity, once the outsiders, became the mediators, the builders, the ones who believed that everyone deserved a seat at the table. Yerrick and Nixra grew old together. Their hair turned white, matching hers, and their steps slowed. But their bond never weakened. They traveled the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as ambassadors of hope. They visited Earth, where Yerrick introduced Nixra to his parents, who were initially terrified of the blue-skinned alien woman but quickly won over by her kindness and her ability to fix their garden with a mere thought. They visited the Vilari homeworld, where Nixra showed Yerrick the ancient libraries and the singing caves, places of beauty that had been hidden from the galaxy for centuries. That in their final years, they returned to Ethelgard. The desert had transformed. The Shattered Expanse was now known as the Garden of Unity, a lush oasis that stretched for miles. The bunker where they had first taken shelter was preserved as a museum, a reminder of the dark days and the choice that had changed everything. One evening, as the twin moons of Ethelgard rose over the horizon, Yerrick and Nixra sat on the porch of their home. They were frail, their bodies worn by time, but their spirits were vibrant. Yerrick held Nixra's hand, feeling the familiar pulse of her life force intertwined with his. "Do you remember," Yerrick said, his voice raspy, "when you asked me why we fought? Why we chose to defend you when everyone else turned away?" Nixra nodded, her eyes closed, soaking in the warmth of the moment. "I remember. You said it was because you knew what it felt like to be alone." "I was wrong," Yerrick said softly. "It wasn't just that. It was because we saw ourselves in you. We saw the potential for greatness, for kindness, for love. We didn't save you because you were weak. We saved you because you were worth saving. And in saving you, we saved ourselves." Nixer opened her eyes and looked at him. Tears welled in her dark eyes, but she was smiling. You gave me a life, Yerrick. You gave me a family. You gave me a world where I could be more than a weapon. You gave me love. And you gave me purpose, Yerrick replied. You showed me that there is more to life than survival. There is connection. There is joy. They sat in silence as the stars wheeled overhead. The galaxy was vast, and there were still challenges, still conflicts, still moments of darkness. But in this small corner of the universe, there was light. There was peace. There was a testament to the power of choice. Yerrick Thorne passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Nixer's hand in his. The psychic bond did not break. Instead, it transformed. Nixera felt him not as a presence in her mind, but as a part of her soul, a constant, comforting warmth that remained with her until her own end, years later. When she passed, the entire settlement mourned. But it was not a mourning of despair. It was a celebration of two lives that had changed the course of history. They were buried side by side in the garden, beneath the ironbark tree where they had exchanged their vows. On their grave, a simple plaque was erected. It did not list their titles or their achievements. It did not mention the battles or the politics. It bore only a single inscription, written in both English and Vilari script. Here lie two who chose love over fear. Here lies the proof that no one is alone. Here begins the future. And so, the story of the alien queen and the human commander did not end in tragedy or glory, but in peace. It ended in the quiet rustle of leaves, the laughter of children playing in the sun, and the enduring knowledge that even in the darkest times, humanity, and those who stood with them, could choose to be the light. The galaxy moved on, expanding and evolving, but the lesson of Ethelgard remained. It was a beacon for all who felt abandoned, a promise that somewhere, someone would choose to stay, someone would choose to defend, someone would choose to love. And in that choice, civilization was not just preserved, it was redeemed.